let's just start with Illinois basketball. That's the thing that we've spent most of our time talking about on this show for the last few years. Before we get into the conversation, I want to preface this by saying I don't think anybody's coming to us for this. We're not going to break any news here.
No,
literally nothing that we're going to tell you is new information. We are getting our same information from the same sources that all of you are, the same podcasts, the same news articles, the same message boards. So all we're going to provide is just our opinion on the situation. So if you are here and you do have comments or questions, feel free to drop them in the comments section. And as I said, we'll give you some thoughts, we'll give you some opinions, but we're not here to really break any news because, quite frankly, that's really not our job, and we're several days late on all of this. So it was a big 24 hours, really. 48 hours towards the end of last week for the Illini. We'll start with the first things that happened, which were the good. Illinois, the last day for players to pull out of the NBA draft to return to college was on Wednesday, I believe. Is that how it played out? Of last week. And
yes,
there were times throughout the entire offseason, really dating all the way back to some point middle of last season, where you thought maybe you'd get Terrence Shannon back, maybe you'd get Coleman Hawkins back, but it wasn't likely you were going to get both. We heard all these reports about who was looking at who, how high somebody was going to get drafted. Who else were they going to get? What was this team going to look like? And I think to the surprise of many, both Terrence Shannon and Coleman Hawkins announced that they would be returning to Illinois for one more season, which, as I said, was probably a surprise to most people, probably even to the two of them. I listened to Coleman talk on Tay and Piper's show last week. And he said that he waited till the absolute last second to make that decision, which I believe. He was doing some trolling of Illini fans all day on Twitter, which I was getting a kick out of. But I believe both him and Terrence waited until the last possible second.
Did you see his dad on Twitter?
I don't know if I saw that. What does Dad say?
John Rothstein tweeted a picture of a handle of Tito's vodka and said, "A necessity for anyone covering like portal season or whatever."
Yeah.
And Rod responded, said, "Try being a dad, or try being the dad."
I'm sure.
Yeah. So the Hawkinses were dominating the Twitter game last week.
Yeah. But that's all good news for Illinois. They return now. Their two most important pieces. Two of the three best players from last season. If you want to put Matthew Meyer in that conversation, you can. But these are the two biggest pieces you needed, and you got them both back. They went through the draft process. They both heard from the scouts, from the teams. They know what they need to improve on. And so now they're going to be back in Champaign, and you're going to get them both for one more season. And hopefully that leads to positive things for the Illini. We'll kind of talk a little bit about each of them individually. I think Terrence Shannon was, in a lot of people's minds, was maybe the most pro ready of the two of them.
Yep.
Was the higher one on most draft boards. But I think he showed while he had his moments last year where he showed like he could be a legitimate pro prospect, it wasn't a complete package. And I think that's what he learned throughout the process. And that's ultimately what drove him to come back. He was first team. He was first team all conference last year, all Big Ten last year. So, you have to figure he's going to be in the conversation for, conference player of the year. Zach Edey will obviously be there. So that's the front runner, but Taryn Shannon is going to be a returning all conference player. The most important piece of the offseason. There's a lot of other factors that could have gone in here. We'll talk about the point guard situation here soon. But the most important piece for this team was to have Terrence Shannon back. And if not to have Terrence Shannon back, to have somebody in that spot, to be the go-to guy, to be the go-to scorer, to be the leader, to be the experienced player. Are you yawning, or you see something
I was
you
yawning.
Want to react to?
I saw yawning.
I
sorry.
thought I didn't know if you were like reacting to something you saw. Okay.
No,
You're
I
just that
am.
tired.
I am on Twitter here just in case something
I figured.
happens.
I
So
figured.
I am listening though.
The point is, Terrence Shannon is back. And I think that was the most important piece. Somewhat unexpected. I do think he was kind of wavering the most. I think down the stretch, I think we thought he was the most likely to return of the two. So when he announced he was coming back, it wasn't a huge shock, but it was the biggest piece.
Yes. Without him, there was no go-to guy.
Correct.
There was no scorer. There was no one you could count on to get at least 10, hopefully 15 a night. There was no one on this roster. So as important as point guard was, and we'll talk point guard next, I'm sure. I agree with everything you said. Terrence Shannon was the one. It was 1A and 1B. He right there with point guard as the most important offseason piece. And if Terrence stayed in, they were kind of screwed because you would have hoped that if he was going to the draft, he would have decided in March so you could go get someone in the portal to replace him. So they're lucky that he came back. And again, as we do on this show all the time, we are in agreement here that it makes no sense in the world as to why Coleman would stay in and Terrence would not. Terrence is a much more pro-ready prospect, in my opinion. As obviously they're both coming back, so it's kind of doesn't matter. But yeah, I was Coleman somewhat surprised me, but the longer that it drug on, the more confident I was that he was coming back to Illinois.
Yeah. Real quick on the Terrence thing. I think had you lost Terrence Shannon, you would have really missed Jaden Epps.
Yeah.
I think Jaden Epps leaving was there was multiple layers to that. He wasn't a true point guard. That's what this team needed. But if you didn't have Terrence Shannon, I think Jaden Epps could have somewhat filled that void. Not as the go-to guy, not as, 16 a game, whatever. I don't remember what Shannon averaged, but that wasn't going to be him, but I think he would have helped fill that void. And after he left, yes, they brought in some key pieces, and we'll talk about some of those pieces again because, we already have several weeks ago, but that would have been a nice, at least, something to fall back on. But Terrence came back. You don't have to worry about it now. You have your go-to guy. As far as Coleman goes, yeah, I agree. He seemed to be the one most likely to go. Coleman had said he was probably the most vocal player from this team last year.
Yep.
Was very open with the media, made the comment to John Rothstein, when the process started that if he was going to come back to Illinois, he wanted to see a more experienced roster. He'd already, kind of flirted with transfer stuff in the past. He's a California kid, really has no ties to the Midwest, so like that was, to me, that was he was the least likely to go. And it's not because I do agree that I think Terrence Shannon was the most pro-ready right now, but I think Coleman Hawkins' game translates better to what the current NBA is. The problem with Coleman is that he's not quite to the level that they need him to be. He's good at a lot of things, but he's not great at any of them. He's a stretch four. He's a good passer. He's a good facilitator. He's an okay shooter. He's a good rebounder. He does the things that you want somebody like that to do, but he's not great at any of it. So sounds like what he heard from the NBA is going to involve, being a better shooter, just shooting more in general. I don't think he's a particularly bad shooter. I think that he just passed up on those opportunities a lot. Yeah. And maybe that was just him, being that type of personality. Maybe that was because he thought that, there were other guys on the court that are better scorers than he is. And maybe some of those things are true. But I think what he learned is that if he's going to have a future in the NBA, which it sounds like, he thinks he can, he's got to be more willing to shoot. And that's going to come with building confidence to just become a better shooter. So yeah. I think getting him back was the most surprising, but I agree with what you said. I think the longer we waited, I think I felt more confident that he was going to stay.
Yeah. I mean, you're echoing exactly what he said on the drive with Tay and Piper.
Some of that was,
the NBA scout said, shoot the ball, dude. Shoot the ball, dude. And I had this thought while he was talking. I was like, There is no one that annoys me more that I'm happier to see back in orange and blue than Coleman Hawkins. if that makes sense.
Sure.
I mean, every game it's like we gave the hand on the head moment of some Coleman Hawkins decision or something, but he was right there with Terrence as important pieces of this offseason. So, I'm ecstatic that they're both back. I think they're a borderline top 25 team as it stands right now. If you don't have either of them, you're squarely on the bubble, maybe outside looking in.
Yeah.
If you have one of the two, you're probably more comfortably in the field, but still probably on the bubble. So to have them both back, it should be there might be a little sweating on Selection Sunday because I definitely don't think this team's a lock for the tournament yet. But I would put it at like 80-90% lock with both of them back. So overall, that aspect of last week was fantastic, obviously getting both of them back.
Let me ask you this. I guess I know partially why you're saying what you just said. But on paper, do you think this team is worse than last year? I don't see how that's possible. I really don't. I mean, yes, you're losing a good scorer in Matt Meyer, but he was as streaky as anybody else. Yes, Sky Clark was a non-factor. Jaden Epps provided you some stuff. RJ Melendez did next to nothing. I like the guy. I would have liked to see him stay, but I mean, I'm just looking at it on paper. We know the point guard thing. We'll talk about the point guard thing, and I understand but that was an issue last year. And yes, this team had its flaws. I would venture to guess that this team is better than a
top 20, you think?
No, well, maybe. I'm just saying because you were talking about sweating out on Selection Sunday. I don't think this is a bubble team. I think this team's better than a bubble team.
I guess sweating out wasn't the right word because this team should make the tournament. I guess the better term is this team won't be wearing white in the first round. They'll be wearing their dark colored.
I mean, I certainly think that's on the table.
Yeah.
I do for the most part like what they've built. They didn't exactly check all the boxes, and that's something we do plan on talking about. But just getting those two guys back was a huge step forward because we didn't know what this team was going to look like. We had seen the additions that they had made already, and the additions of Damask and Guerrier and Harmon were indicative that this team was going to be older, wanted to be older. They kind of filled holes, but they weren't like go-to guys. So I don't disagree with you, but I think they're better than a bubble team. But I see what you're saying. I do think they could definitely be,
I could see this season as the roster stands right now going very much like last year. You're 20, 22 wins, double-digit losses, and you're between a 6 and a 10 seed.
I want to think that the experience will play a factor.
Yeah.
Last year, the experience was not good. This team had no experience.
Yeah.
TJ Shannon and Matt Meyer were the only guys that had seen significant minutes at the Division I level. Coleman Hawkins was a bench piece the year before, and nobody else had even touched the floor in a college game. Now you're looking at your entire rotation being fourth and fifth year guys, plus a couple sophomores. But I mean, maybe. It's possible you're right, but I want to give a little bit of credit to the experience that this team will have in those type of situations.
Well, how many of the transfers have NCAA postseason experience? Damask does not. Harmon, I believe, does not.
None. I mean,
Guerrier,
Harmon played in the NIT. No, I mean none. Very little, if any. 2
at Syracuse, 2 at Oregon. Yeah. I don't know.
No, that's true. That's fair.
So there's college experience, but there's not winning in the postseason experience, which is going to be hard to find in the transfer portal because if you're winning in the postseason, why are you wouldn't transfer?
No, that's fair. That's fair.
But I do agree. I like when there are more upperclassmen than underclassmen. We'll just put it that way.
Yeah. Okay, so those were the two good things that happened. Both of those things were rather surprising, somewhat surprising things that happened positively for Illinois last week. The day following was the day that RayJ Dennis announced what he was going to do. RayJ Dennis is not a name that we've talked about on this show. We did not bring him up in the past because he was just kind of a name out there that there was really no actual
tweeted about him?
Huh?
Did I ever tweet about him?
I don't know. I don't know if you ever did. Did you?
I can't remember.
I planned on talking about RayJ Dennis, but we just never did a show around that time. So whatever. If you're listening to this show, if you're watching this show, I'm almost positive you know who RayJ Dennis is. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about him because he's essentially at this point a non-factor. But if you don't know, let's just lay it out. Illinois went into the transfer portal season not knowing that they needed a point guard, knowing that they desperately needed an experienced point guard, passing on any possible point guard that came up because they thought they had their guy already. They thought they knew who their guy was and that he was eventually going to enter the transfer portal and that they were going to be able to get him. I know that you have thoughts, and I will get to you, sir. But that's what happened. RayJ Dennis, eventually he's a Chicago guy from the suburbs. Started at Boise State, played 2 years there, transferred to Toledo, ended up being the MAC Player of the Year last year. Great point guard. They thought that he was the perfect fit for this team. As he enters into the portal, he visits Illinois, he visits Baylor, he visits Utah, he visits Michigan. Illinois still thinks they're the front runner. They're going to get him. They're going to land him. They're going to land him. All of a sudden, he doesn't go to Illinois. He ends up at Baylor. So now Illinois, who sat and watched every point guard enter the portal and leave the portal, were left essentially with nothing. Not a little bit more than nothing. And we'll talk about Jeremiah Williams too. But they don't get him. They don't get RayJ Dennis. Going into Wednesday, you had 3 boxes you were hoping to check. And you checked the first 2, but you couldn't get the third. And that sucks because we knew going into the offseason that was going to be the biggest void. Brad last year gave the keys to the car to a couple of freshmen, quote unquote, point guards. That ended up in flames. And this is where we're at. So I know you had your thoughts on it, your opinions on the RayJ Dennis situation. Yes, you did. You were very vocal on Twitter, and I know you received a lot of negativity towards it. I don't think you were wrong at any point.
Thank you.
No, I mean, I don't think you were wrong. I don't know. I don't know how much we want to get into that particular tweet that was a month and a half ago, but
I know. I'm looking at it right now.
Go ahead. Just let's talk about it. What was your point that you were trying to make, and
so
compared to where we are now?
As with most things on the internet, as soon as I tweeted it and started seeing the response, I was like, okay, this is not being received as I meant it. But at that point, it's like, I can't do anything about it. I'm not going to delete the tweet, and I can't defend it catch-all because people will see that tweet, but they won't see my reply. So it's like, whatever. I'm just going to let it go. So my tweet was, quote, can I just say if RayJ Dennis is the Illini point guard target everyone was referring to, that's very underwhelming. That wasn't necessarily a knock on RayJ. RayJ's a great point guard. Anyone would have loved to have him wearing the orange and blue as the Illinois point guard next season. What I was getting at was he's not good enough to wait for him to make a freaking decision and not go after other point guards. That was my point. It was more a knock on the approach of the coaching staff to finding their point guard than RayJ as a player. Now, there was no way after I sent that tweet and it started getting the response that I was going to get that point across to everyone else that saw the tweet. But that's what I was getting at. He's not good enough, or Illinois, more so, Illinois wasn't in a position to wait on this dude to make a decision. They had to get a point guard this offseason. Because look what happened. They let it go on too long. They didn't close the deal. Someone got in his ear, or he saw something or heard something from someone that said, you don't want to go to Illinois. Whether that be, I honestly don't know what it could have been, because everything lined up for him to be a perfect fit at Illinois. So my critique wasn't necessarily against RayJ. It was against the fact that you cannot wait on a particular player in this era of the transfer portal. If you have a need, you have to go fill it, because look what happens. You don't close it, you let other schools hang around, and then you get screwed on June 1st when the guy that you thought was a lock from your state, had a connection to your coaching staff, goes somewhere else.
Yeah, those aren't the words that you tweeted.
No, I agree. The way I worded it, it made it sound like, and at the time I was probably looking through it as this dude's a MAC point guard. He has no Power 5 experience or no high major experience. There was some of that rooted in that tweet that, at the time Caleb Love was out there. There were other, who was the other point guard? Armstrong, was that his name?
I don't remember. There was a lot of them that
were
floated around.
So, go ahead.
What was I going to say? There's a lot of layers to this. This is obviously still new to everyone, new to the coaches, new to the players. The transfer portal thing is very new. We're still trying to figure it out. But there's a lot of layers to how all of this broke down. I understand your argument, for and against RayJ Dennis. I get where you're coming from. What I have been trying to say, and what some people have, also said elsewhere, is that you didn't really know what kind of player you needed. There was all this talk about RayJ Dennis being, the MAC player of the year, and he does all these things well. And he might have been great. He might have not been great. But if you knew you were going to get Terrence Shannon back and Coleman Hawkins back, you didn't need a player of the year candidate. You didn't need to have that sort of explosive. You just needed an experienced facilitator. That's all this team needed from the very beginning. But if Terrence Shannon doesn't come back and you lose Jaden Epps, that calls for a whole new type of player. And there's no perfect solution here. I don't know what Brad and the coaching staff knew. I don't know what the players, the Terrence Shannons of the world and the Coleman Hawkins of the world and the RayJ Dennises of the world, I don't know what was going on in all their heads. All we know is what else is being said and put out into the world. I just can't imagine that it's very difficult to figure out or very easy to figure out. I think it's probably very difficult to figure out because you just don't know. We waited until the absolute last second to know for sure that your two best players were coming back. At that point, you just need a point guard. I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's some, as long as he has some experience at the Division I level in a starting position, I would have been okay with it.
So
it didn't need to be the MAC player of the year.
Is that guy already on the team by the name of Justin Harmon?
He's not a point guard.
Is he?
I don't think he's a point guard.
I thought he was a point guard.
Nothing I have seen or read about that guy says that he's a point guard. If he is, then he's very turnover prone. I don't think Justin Harmon is a point guard. He might be a secondary ball handler. He might be, the backup guy coming off the bench, but I don't think Justin Harmon was recruited with the idea of him being this team's starting point guard in November. I don't think that was at all ever the plan, would be my guess. I don't think he's that type of player. So I don't know. I can't defend any of it. I don't know everything. I know you put the comment up here, so I do want to touch on this thing. Jay, welcome, Jay. Thank you for still here. Thanks for chiming in here. Jay asked, so did the return of Hawkins and Terrence have an impact on RayJ coming here? My thought, and I don't know if I have no evidence to prove this. I have not asked people. Haven't heard people talk about this. I wonder if they did have a negative impact financially.
Oh,
Would be my guess. I don't know that for sure. I don't know what sort
Yeah.
of dollars through the NIL collective at Illinois are being offered to certain players. But is it possible that there was only a certain amount of dollars that they were able to offer up to players, and when you get both of them back, you may not have had the number to match what RayJ wanted?
yeah.
Is that possible? I mean, I'm just,
Very.
or I mean, I could be. I'm just saying this. I've not heard this. I don't know. I'm not.
And I'm
just kind of
sure
speculating, but
to get Coleman and Terrence to come back, the number that they were told on May 30th was probably larger than the number they were told on May 15th.
probably, yeah.
Another negative impact and that I was going to say was if RayJ wanted to put up the numbers that he did at Toledo,
Yeah.
he wasn't going to average 19 at Illinois with Terrence
No.
and Coleman back. So
No.
Terrence and Coleman coming back might have, negatively impacted Illinois, because if RayJ wanted to prove that he could be freaking Damian Lillard or something and score 20 in the Big Ten, he wasn't going to do that with Hawkins and Shannon. So it could have had a negative impact where we thought it would have a positive. So it just depended on what RayJ was prioritizing when making his decision.
So we don't know. We may never know about all the decisions that went down here. I don't know what was going through
if you want to know, I'm sure Derek Piper will have some sort of write-up because he was all over it.
Yes, I'm sure at some point there will be some information from Derek. Yes. But that's where we stand right now. Illinois did pivot immediately after the RayJ Dennis thing, and they did announce that they signed Jeremiah Williams to join them in Champaign. Williams, another Chicago kid, played at Temple for a couple years, then transferred last year. Illinois was in the mix last year, but lost him to Iowa State. He then got hurt, tore his ACL before the season even started, so didn't even play a second of basketball last year. Entered the portal again, and now is coming back to Champaign. Jeremiah Williams, I guess, can be considered a point guard. I think he's the closest thing to a point guard this team has. He's a 6'4" guard. He's a good defender. He's not much of a shooter, which was obviously the other big hole this team needed to fill, and they really didn't. But there's a couple different issues here with Jeremiah Williams. One, he's coming off an ACL tear, so you do not know how his health will be. Achilles, whatever. Yeah, sorry. And so you don't know what his health situation is going to be. And then there's the whole thing where he's already transferred once, so he's going to require a waiver. There is absolutely no guarantee that this man's going to play a game next year for Illinois. Yeah. Granted, he does still have 2 more years at least after this, I think.
He can get a medical for last year.
Yeah, so there's multiple years ahead of him. So even if he doesn't play this year, you have him for the future, which is part of why they wanted to get him anyway. But there's nothing guaranteeing that he will step on the court for the Illini this year. So, I mean, I guess it's a decent fallback plan. I think it would have made more sense had you still gotten RayJ. But at that point, there's other issues here because now the roster is absolutely full.
Yep.
So we'll see. The Jeremiah Williams thing was kind of a bomb that I don't think anybody saw coming, but I think everybody's attention was on Terrence Shannon, Coleman Hawkins, and RayJ Dennis, that they didn't even really think about what else could be happening. But Jeremiah Williams is currently the 13th and final man on the roster as we stand right now. If he's healthy, if he's able to play, you can probably pencil him in to be your starting point guard. I don't know that I love it, but I think that's what you're looking at right now. But we don't know the health situation, and we don't know when the waiver will get approved or whatever. So that's where we are. I don't know what happens next. Word on the street, around the message boards, is that possible another spot opens up. I wouldn't count on that, but it's possible. And if that's the case, who knows? This team still is in desperate need of an experienced point guard, but I don't know that one's out there that is an actual logistical option for Illinois.
Yep. I think the most interesting thing I've taken away from the last 5 days, week, listening to Coleman Hawkins on Tay and Piper, and Derek Piper got a very interesting answer out of him when asked about the approach to this year as opposed to last year.
Yep.
And Coleman basically said that we babied some guys to cater to them, and then they bailed on us and all of that. Not word for word. Go listen. I'm sure Tay and Piper have their shows archived or podcast. It was last Thursday, so it would have been like June 1st.
You can listen to the podcast form. That's how I listened to it over the weekend.
It's a very candid answer that that's my biggest takeaway of the offseason was that last year they basically let the couple players do whatever they want and they babied them and they didn't coach them hard. And that's what happened. We know what happened. So hopefully this year's different because I think that was our biggest critique of last year. And we'll go from there.
So just to kind of reset the roster right now, as I said, all 13 scholarship roster spots are full.
I got something else when you're done.
Do what?
I got something else when you're done going over this.
You have 4 guys that are fifth-year players, Terrence Shannon, Marcus Damask, Quincy Guerrier, and Justin Harmon. You have a 4th-year player in Coleman Hawkins. You have 3 guys that have at least 2 years, I think. That's where Jeremiah Williams, Luke Goody, and Dane Danger fit. Then you have Sincere Harris and Ty Rogers. And then you have 3 freshmen, Nico Moretti, who redshirted last year, Dre Gibbs Lawhorn, and Amani Hansberry. I don't hate the roster construction. It just, you didn't fill the holes you really needed to fill. That's the problem.
Was the other
That's
thing.
The problem.
But before I get to that, Coleman is the first forward-year Brad Underwood player.
Yeah.
Which, when he announced, that was all over the thing. But what did I text you a couple days ago when we were talking about the roster?
They
2 biggest needs going into the
ball
offseason.
Handler, needed a facilitator, and you needed shooters.
And have they addressed either of those?
Not really. No.
Exactly.
No.
So, but they do have more experience. So
they do have more experience. I don't, you and I are probably more familiar with Marcus Damask than most people that are watching and listening to this show. He's not a point guard and he's not a shooter necessarily, but I think he can do things. He's probably going to be a better player than some people want to give him credit for.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that you can necessarily write him in pen that he'll be a starter to start this season, but I think you can pencil him in into that mix. I think him and Shannon and Coleman, I would pencil into the 3 of the 5 spots. I think Guerrier, or it'd be Guerrier or Dane will be your other post player. And then if he's healthy, I guess it's Jeremiah Williams at the point, unless they add somebody else. If it's not, Justin Harmon or Ty Rogers are probably your point guards. Yeah. Which I have been a little. I think Ty Rogers could do that, but he's not really to that. He's not a point guard right now, but I think he could be a facilitator for this team. We'll see how much they rely on him to do that.
So my question is this now a Sincere Harris jersey or is this a Marcus Damask jersey?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know who's going to wear the number 1 next year. Yes, that was Sincere's jersey last year. Damask wore 1 at Southern. So yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. All right. We've been talking about Illinois basketball for about 30 minutes. You have anything else Illinois basketball related that we need to touch on? Andre Curbelo.
Yeah.
Going to Southern Miss. It's fine. I'm not upset. A little upset, not upset. Yeah, we'll see. There could be more, but I would say there's probably not more. I would venture to guess this is the roster going into the season, but I've been surprised before.